Hello, welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here are the headlines. The United Nations warns of dangerous escalation as Russia prepares to annex 4 Ukrainian regions. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno says Russian annexation of Ukraine regions cannot be tolerated. And Moscow says it's in talks with the United States to revive a key nuclear deal. Thanks for letting us be part of your morning routine, and welcome to Lagos. It's going to be a big day for Russian President Vladimir Putin as he prepares to formally receive 4 Ukrainian regions into Russia following what has been described as a sham referendum in those areas. The Russian president yesterday signed 2 decrees recognizing the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia as independent sovereign states. The decrees come into force immediately. And in the documents, the Russian president refers to the universally recognized principles and norms of international law and the principle of equal rights amid self-determination of peoples enshrined in the UN Charter. But the UN has warned that if Russia moves ahead with the plans for annexation of the Ukrainian regions, it would mark a dangerous escalation that would jeopardize the prospects for peace in the region. A stark warning comes from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres himself.
Be clear, the Russian Federation is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, shares a particular responsibility to respect the Charter. Any decision to proceed with the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, regions of Ukraine, would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. It cannot be reconciled with the international legal framework. It stands against everything the international community is meant to stand for. It flouts the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is a dangerous escalation. It has no place in the modern world. It must not be accepted. The Kremlin has announced that the ceremony will take place tomorrow in Moscow, that will launch a process of annexation of the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. In this moment of peril, I must underscore my duty as Secretary General to uphold the Charter of the United Nations. The UN Charter is clear. Any annexation of a state territory by another state resulting from the threat or use of force is a violation of the principles of the UN Charter and international law. The United Nations General Assembly is equally clear. In its landmark Friendly Relations Declaration of 24 October 1970, repeatedly cited the stating rules of general international law by the International Court of Justice, the General Assembly declared that the territory of a state shall not be the object of acquisition by another state resulting from the threat or use of force, and that no territorial acquisition resulting from the threat or use of force shall be recognized as legal. The position of the United Nations is unequivocal. We are fully committed to the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. I want to underscore that the so-called referenda in the occupied regions were conducted during active armed conflict in areas under Russian occupation and outside Ukraine's legal and constitutional framework. They cannot be called a genuine expression of the popular will. Any decision by Russia to go forward will further jeopardize the prospects for peace. It will prolong the dramatic impacts on the global economy, especially developing countries, and hinder our ability to deliver life-saving aid across Ukraine and beyond. It is high time to step back from the brink. Now more than ever, we must work together to end this devastating and senseless war and uphold the UN Charter and international law.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres given his opinions and thoughts
And with your permission,
on
I'd
the
also
annexation of the regions in Ukraine. A fellow UN Security Council member, the United States, has vowed to never to recognize Russia's claims on Ukraine's sovereign territory. President Joe Biden was speaking to Pacific Island leaders on Thursday when he denounced the referendum that pro-Russia forces conducted in areas of Ukraine as an absolute sham, saying the results were manufactured in Moscow. The U.S. is currently working with allies to impose more sanctions as soon as Russia makes the annexations.
And with your permission, I'd also like to briefly address the shameless and transparent effort by Russia to annex parts of neighbor Ukraine. The United States, I want to be very clear about this, the United States will never recognize Russia's claims on Ukraine's sovereign territory. This so-called referendum was a sham, an absolute sham. The results were manufactured in Moscow. And the true will of the Ukrainian people is evident every day as they sacrifice their lives to save their people and maintain the independence of their country and in defense of freedom as well. Russia's assault on Ukraine in pursuit of Putin's imperial ambitions is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter and the basic principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. I'm grateful to the Pacific Island leaders for standing up for these basic principles and for your strong moral leadership on global issues at the United Nations.
In the meantime, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Russia could avoid the most damaging consequences of its war against Kyiv, but to do so, President Vladimir Putin has to be stopped. During his regular evening address, the Ukrainian president said that Russia would not be able to successfully annex 4 Ukrainian regions, as announced by President Putin.
Россия не получит новую территорию Украины. Россия присоединит себя.
Russia will not get the new territory of Ukraine. Russia will only join the disaster it has brought to the occupied territory of our country. Russia will equate itself to the so-called DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, and LNR, Luhansk People's Republic, and finally destroy the institution of normal statehood that were still left in Russia. The occupier fills the occupied territory of Ukraine with graves, and there are more and more graves on the territory of Russia itself. The occupier sets up torture chambers in the occupied territory and will fill the entire territory of Russia with torture chambers. It is the only way the Russian police and Russia's special services will work from now on. The occupier destroys any foundation for life everywhere in the occupied territory. The economy, the social sphere, and the culture. The price that one person in Russia wants to continue this war will be that the entire Russian society will be left without a normal economy, without a decent life, and without respect for any human values. It can still be stopped. But to stop this, we have to stop the one in Russia who wants war more than life. Your life, citizens of Russia.
Now, more condemnations for Russia's plans to annex 4 regions in Ukraine, this time from Japan. Government spokesperson Hirokazu Matsuno said the plans cannot be tolerated and that Tokyo will work with G7 countries to take strong measures against Moscow. President Vladimir Putin was set to host a Kremlin ceremony today annexing 4 regions of Ukraine, while his Ukrainian counterpart says Putin will have to be stopped for Russia to avoid the most damaging consequences of the war. Now, the annexation of eastern and southern provinces comes after what Ukraine and the Western countries say were sham votes staged at gunpoint in Russian-occupied areas of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. A territory Russia controls amounts to more than 90,000 square kilometers, or about 15% of Ukraine's total area, equal to the size of Hungary or Portugal. Also, Russia and the United States are said to be both considering the resumption of inspections under a nuclear arms reduction treaty known as START. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova told a briefing on Thursday the new START is a key nuclear arms reduction treaty that puts a cap on the number of deployed nuclear warheads as well as their delivery vehicles. The two powers are considering the resumption of mutual inspections of deployed nuclear arsenals in particular, which was suspended back in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Zakharova also says Russia and the US might also hold an in-person meeting of the Bilateral Advisory Commission, adding that such possibilities are being studied. The commission is currently holding a remote session as its members discuss organizational and technical issues that need to be addressed. And now to updates on the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines. Russia claims that NATO conducted exercises using deep-sea equipment in the areas where gas leaks in the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines were detected this week. This is according to the Foreign Ministry. Spokesperson Maria Zakharova again dismissed any allegations that Russia was behind the incident during her morning briefing, instead asking reporters when exactly did Russia decide it wanted to stop supplying energy to Europe. She said that NATO was engaged in military activities close to the location where the leaks were found, noting that it might have presented an interesting opportunity for the bloc. But for U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, it's still too soon to speculate who might have been behind the Nord Stream pipeline ruptures. He says he discussed the incidents with his Danish counterpart on Wednesday.
In terms of the attack or the damage to the pipeline, at this point, I think there's a lot of speculation, but quite frankly, until complete investigation is done, no one will be able to really determine for certain what happened. I had the opportunity to speak with my counterpart in Denmark yesterday. We talked about what happened, and he pointed out to me that it will be several days before he's able to get the right team in to look at the sites and really try to determine as best possible what happened. And so until we get further information and are able to do further analysis, we won't speculate on who may have been responsible.
In the meantime, those Russian rockets are still causing death and destruction in Ukraine. One attack happened on Thursday in the city of Mykolaiv. The Smerch MLRS, fired from the temporarily occupied Kherson region, hit the middle of a residential area near a public transport stop in Mykolaiv at about 6:30 local time. According to the regional administration, the strike was executed on a residential district. This time of day, lots of civilians were there. Right at the time when people came back, the strike was treacherously executed. The ammunition exploded in mid-air, scattering cartridges over a 2-block radius. As a result of the attack, 3 people died and at least 12 were seriously injured. The victims were taken away by ambulances. Their conditions remain currently unknown. The ammunition exploded in mid-air, scattering cartridges over a 2-block radius, as earlier reported. Let's bring in now former Nigerian ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Frank Iso. He joins me from our studio in Abuja. Ambassador Iso, thank you so much for making time for me this morning.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
We've seen Russia annex Crimea in 2014, and this morning President Putin is supposed to oversee, a ceremony formally welcoming those Ukrainian regions where the referendum took place recently. How important is this to Russia, and can it be considered as some sort of victory for the Putin administration?
Well, from my own point of view, I would say it's a kind of Pyrrhic victory for Russia. Whatever Russia does today to officially annex those 4 territories, it will be seen as illegal, and it is illegal under international law. But in a de facto sense, I doubt if any country can stop Russia from incorporating this country, these counties, into the motherland, as it were. But it's illegal, just like the absorption of Crimea into Russia in 2014. This will never be recognized by the international community. But the problem here is that in a de facto sense, if care is not taken, Ukraine may just have lost those territories for good, except there's somebody that is able to stop Russia, or if perchance Ukraine is able to win this war. But it's going to take a very, very long time. As things stand now, Russia is very good at having won this part of the battle, as it were. But then, why is it important for Russia to have these territories incorporated and declared Russian territory? Because that will increase the popularity of Putin in Russia, in the sense that he will not be able to further justify the essence of the war, that Russian territory is being attacked by a foreign power, and then we'll have to go all out to find a way, to defend Mother Russia. He has been threatening that he could use tactical nuclear weapons if Russian territory is attacked. We don't know if this will trigger that response or not. But from all intent and purposes, I think he's won this aspect of the battle. But I think it's a Pyrrhic victory, because in the final analysis, that annexation is not going to be recognized by the international community.
So I have two questions. First of all, what can the international community do? I mean, we've seen what happened in Crimea. Just as we see now, lots of condemnations and all that, and Ukraine is just about making impact in Crimea and hitting Russian installations in the country. In the region, but it still hasn't reclaimed Crimea.
Well, sadly, the war will just continue, and the international community will be very, very handicapped to do something about this. It depends on Ukraine to keep fighting, and through such a vigorous effort, maybe they might be able to defeat Russia and reclaim those territories. But I don't see this happening, in the near future. So we are faced with a situation where an obvious land grab is being perpetrated by Russia, and is likely to get away with it in the interim, so to speak.
Yeah, and then the second question, you talked about Russia's President Putin's popularity, what the referendum holds for Russia. But then you find that the Russian president is trying to mobilize and recruit reservists, and a lot of men are crossing the border running away from Russia. Isn't that counterproductive? I mean, does it really extend his popularity in Russia if his own people really don't want to be involved in this war?
Well, perhaps, in the interim, among the diehard supporters of Putin, they might seem as somebody who's really fighting for Mother Russia. But if any opinion polls are really held in Russia today, I doubt if his popularity will be as high as it was when he annexed Crimea. And the essence is that the people of Russia are beginning to see through, the whole plot of invading Ukraine. I mean, these are two peoples who have lived together for centuries. Languages are similar, cultures are similar, and they've all been brought up, from infancy to believe that they are kith and kin. So now they are beginning to question the essence of fighting their own brothers. That is the essence of this reaction by the people of Russia. They are not ready, to go along with what they think is Putin's personal agenda.
Yeah, they wouldn't, right? So despite the condemnations from the international community, the UN reminding us, what the Charter says about those land grabs and how they will not be recognizing those regions as Russian regions. We still talk about diplomacy as still being on the table in this war. Is it already a dead end? Because the Russian president is re-strategizing, preparing to make a comeback because of those counteroffensives that have been successful for Ukraine?
Well, the thing is, the decision of whether to restart any diplomatic talks will depend on the outcome of the war on the field. Until Ukraine started making this kind of advances, in recent times, Russia didn't really take the war seriously. But now, with more weapons streaming in from the West, offensive weapons for that matter, better training for Ukrainian soldiers, it's now obvious to Russia that it is, sunk into a very, very long-drawn war. Unlike 2014, when they just strolled into Crimea and annexed it, but it's becoming something too big for them to swallow. Any talk of diplomatic discussion this time, will be premature because both sides are dogging, in their position. I don't see Ukraine, accepting any kind of talk that will not include Russia vacating its territories. And because of ego, I don't see Putin as a leader withdrawing from Ukraine, except the situation gets so untidy for Russia and there's an internal revolt that might see Putin out of power. It's been done before, in the former Soviet Union. If you recall, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the then leader, Khrushchev, was ousted in 1964 because of the kind of bad publicity, the misadventure brought to Soviet Union. So if present-day Russians, see similar thing happening, they are likely to move against Putin rather than have the whole world really turn against them the way things are now.
Yes, joining us now also is Olena Snyder. She is an expert of global studies in Ukraine. She joins us via Zoom. Olena, we've spoken to you before. Thank you for joining us again. Tell us, what the mood is like, for many Ukrainians. I mean, we've had weeks of counteroffensive in certain regions, especially in Crimea, where Russia had annexed. And now we see Russia conduct referenda in in other regions, and President Putin about to announce the annexation today. How does that make you feel?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. And this referenda that Russia conducts on the occupied territories, as well as the referenda in Crimea, this referenda means nothing, because according to international law, according to the right of self-identification, it's just, we all understand, we saw it before in Georgia, of course, and even before in early 90s in Moldova. So it's traditional Russian practice to create fake events to legitimize its own aggressive policy, because Russia is authoritarian regime, but it is a big country. It is a huge country with a lot of population, and one of the biggest countries in the world. They of course put pressure on its own society, but they need to legitimize its actions before the eyes of their own society. They need to put arguments on the table, like why they are doing this. That's why they create fake events like referendums and everything else, to explain their next steps, their next policy. So these referenda are put on the ground only with the one aim to justify the mobilization in Russia, to justify the continuation of this unnecessary war and bloody war. And the next is, which we are concerned very much about, is the possible usage of nuclear weapon, even tactical nuclear weapon, because Russians, they declared it openly that they do not exclude this opportunity and this chance that they will use it. So we are waiting for that. Actually, we are preparing for that. We do not exclude that they will dare to use nuclear weapon, because it's their military doctrine that allows them to do it. to protect their territories. And if they name these territories of another country their own territories, then they can declare that, yeah, now we will protect it with all our means, with all means that we have. Yeah, so that's that's the situation right now, and according the mood that you've asked me about, it's Ukrainians are. We won't stop. I mean, we have. It's the same as before. We knew it from the very beginning that Kremlin will go to the end in this war, and we just do not have a choice because their aim doesn't change. They do not declare that they have changed their goals or their aims and they are ready to negotiate something. They still declare that we do not have the right to exist. It's just the meanings, the tools, the instruments of this war and the tactics are changed now because they lose. They are losing. That's why they do all what they're doing now.
But doesn't the referendum complicate things for Ukraine? I remember that just before the war, President Putin recognized Donetsk and Luhansk as autonomous regions of Ukraine. And in the Donbas region, part of it is also being controlled by Russia. Doesn't that further complicate the situation for President Zelenskyy, who's tried so hard, to keep Ukraine as one and also vowed not to give even one piece of territory to Russia? And we've seen, it's difficult regaining any of these territories back.
Well, now, it's difficult regaining because we do not want to lose many people at the war, because we are trying to save lives of our militaries. That's why it is the operations, the counteroffensive is going slowly, but it continues actually. And tonight we had good news about the operation near Liman in the east of Ukraine. So according to your question, what you have asked about the complications, no, it does not complicate anything for Ukraine because legally those referenda mean nothing. According to international law, according to international relations, foreign affairs, foreign politics, they mean nothing. The same concerns, the same is about referendum in Crimea in 2014. According to international law, it is illegal and it is not recognized and it will never be recognized. The same we say about this referenda, which happened recently. That means only one thing, that Russia is not ready for negotiations and doesn't want negotiations. Russia wants just war, to continue its war. That's what it means to us right now.
Yeah. Alina, thank you. Ambassador, may I just come to you for a bit? Russia and the United States still continuing negotiations on the START 2 agreements. They want to renew the negotiations on that. Why has that not been affected by both parties' stance on the war in Ukraine?
Well, international politics, you continue with all the engagements. But in the case of Ukraine, I think it's something that is very dear to both countries. For the West, they see the Russian adventure in Ukraine as an avenue to bleed Russia militarily. And they wouldn't mind really if the war continues. And that is why they are gradually, creepingly increasing weapon supplies to Ukraine. But then other aspects of engagement certainly will continue. That is START 2 you talked about. The impression has to be given to the entire world that both countries are not at war and that they are desirous, to have peace. But then translating that into having this kind of a peace everybody's looking for in Ukraine is sort of difficult to achieve in the sense that the ego of Putin is involved here, and the desire of Ukraine to maintain its territorial integrity is equally involved. So the U.S. has little leeway to play any meaningful role, in this respect. So they will continue their engagements, but the war in Ukraine, offers them the opportunity to test the resolve, both countries to seek global dominance. That's why, I believe, it's going to be difficult for them to have that kind of agreement. And then, too, Ukrainian interests cannot be sacrificed by the West in trying to reach accommodation with Putin.
Indeed. Ambassador Frank Issou, thank you so much for speaking with us. Olina Snyga, expert at the Center for Global Studies in Ukraine. Thank you also for joining us on the program, both of you. Really, your contribution is really invaluable. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
We're still ahead on the program. Russian President Vladimir Putin promises mistakes in military mobilization will be fixed. Welcome back, and we'll hear from the Russian President Vladimir Putin in a minute, speaking at a meeting of Russia's Security Council on Thursday and saying that all mistakes made during a partial military mobilization to reinforce Russia's military operation in Ukraine should be corrected. He also said that those who had military experience and training in required specialties should be called up first. There have been widespread public expressions of discontent from officials and citizens over the way the mobilization announced last week has been handled, including complaints about enlistment officers sending call-up papers to ineligible men. Thousands of men have fled Russia to avoid the draft.
During this mobilization, mistakes need to be corrected and they are not made in the future. This is about those citizens who qualify for department. For example, fathers who have many children or people suffering from chronic diseases, or those who can't be drafted because of their senior age. It is necessary to investigate each case like this separately. If the mistake has been made, I repeat, it should be corrected and return home those who had been drafted unreasonably.
And then we hear from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy again, addressing the people living in the Caucasus and elsewhere on Russian territory, telling them that they do not have to die in Ukraine. Zelenskyy said that during the first week of the criminal mobilization, more men have already fled Russia than the Russian authorities were officially planning to send to war. Last week's announcement of Russia's first public mobilization since World War II to shore up its faltering Ukraine war triggered a rush for the border, the arrest of protesters, and an unease in the wider population. With tens of thousands of Russian men fleeing abroad to escape Putin's military call-up, Finland shut one of the few remaining routes to Europe, saying it would no longer let Russians enter by land with EU tourist visas.
Не получит новую территорию Украины. Россия присоединит себя.
Russia will not get the new territory of Ukraine. Russia will only join the disaster it has brought to the occupied territory of our country. Russia will equate itself to the so-called DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, and LNR, Luhansk People's Republic, and finally destroy the institution of normal statehood that were still left in Russia. The occupier fills the occupied territory of Ukraine with graves, and there are more and more graves on the territory of Russia itself. The occupier sets up torture chambers in the occupied territory and will fill the entire territory of Russia with torture chambers. It is the only way the Russian police and Russia's special services will work from now on. The occupier destroys any foundation for life everywhere in the occupied territory. The economy, the social sphere, and the culture. The price that one person in Russia wants to continue this war will be that the entire Russian society society will be left without a normal economy, without a decent life, and without respect for any human values.
I do apologize for the breakup in the audio of the translation, beg your pardon, for the Ukrainian president. But speaking about Finland shutting its borders to Russian tourists who are fleeing enlistment into the army, Russian tourists continue to enter Finland on Thursday, just before it closed its border to Russian tourists at midnight, shutting off the last remaining direct land routes to the European Union for them as thousands of Russians seek to avoid conscription into the war in Ukraine. It was a steady stream of cars coming through at the Valima border crossing, although traffic had calmed after the weekend when almost 17,000 Russians crossed the border into Finland. The Finnish government said the move would lead to a significant drop in cross-border traffic, but that entry for family visits as well as for work and studies would still be permitted. It said it's just that today information came in that the border would be closed and I had to leave in a hurry. Of course, as one of the people was trying to leave, travel agent Maria Muratova, who also crossed into Finland from Russia. Now, almost 17,000 Russians who crossed the border into Finland during the weekend represented an 80% rise from a week earlier, according to Finnish authorities. Joining me now is security expert Chidi Nwonu. He's in London. Chidi, I'm sure you're looking with interest at the movement of these Russians fleeing Russia, and not because there is a war in Russia. They're actually fleeing conscription into the military. Why do you think that is?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on. Well, the problem is obviously that this is not a war that involves the Russian people. It's not like a glorious war or an existential war like the Second World War, where Russia was actually being invaded. This is a war of choice that most Russians don't feel they have a part of. So naturally, the first thing that most people would do is flee, because there is no point dying in a war that you didn't choose, you don't want to fight, and more importantly, there's no real how will I put this? There's no real chance of glory or honor from this war. Although even we in the West, we can see the pictures coming back of Russian soldiers, the conditions that they're suffering, and how high the casualties are. The same thing is percolating in Russia. So you're going to go to this war. There's a high probability of being killed or wounded or captured and humiliated, and you've got really nothing to show for it when you come back. So logically, and the final point is, the professional Russian army, as it were, has already been held by the Ukrainians. So if you are a civilian being called up now with maybe after training maybe 10 years ago and being given very little training and deployed to the front, you have very little hope of surviving, and you know this. So that would inform most people logically to flee or resist call-up.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like, the Ukrainian military, the civilian force, which was formed at the early part of the war, where people with some military knowledge or those who just want to fight were trained just before the war started, weeks before President Putin invaded and his forces, invaded Ukraine. But again, to the reason why these people are leaving, I understand that the Russian government made huge promises to these people, promise of big financial gains, things like that. The families would be taken care of. For those who are not Russians, they would have citizenship and all of that. Why isn't this enticing enough, for these ones? If this is so much about, the Russian president gaining glory, isn't he giving enough incentive to people to join the military?
So that's an interesting point, and it touches on many issues on several levels. So the first, I'll just touch very, very quickly on the point you raised about the Ukrainians doing the same and raising what we call a Livian mass, arming the population. Again, fundamentally different. These people were defending their homes. They weren't going on an attack. They were essentially sitting in one position with a rifle and pointing at the enemy and shooting. They weren't attacking anyone, and they were motivated by the fact that they were literally defending their homes, their families. That's a completely different thing from getting up, leaving your house to go and attack somebody else's country. But in terms of the mobilization itself and the incentives, so the problem is, even with all the financial incentives, the citizen incentives, the citizenship incentives, that is not enough to motivate somebody to go to a war where you're going to die or be injured. And as I said, because the conditions for the Russian soldiers at the front are not good, they've got very bad leaders, particularly at the tactical level, or not very many good ones. Most of the good ones are dead or are burned out. And winter is coming. There is very little trust in the Russian system. You can see from the mobilization itself that they've mobilized old men, elderly men, people who are in critical jobs, IT specialists, doctors, etc. So you can see from the confusion and the corruption that there are already issues in the Russian military system that people can see as they're getting mobilized. So there's not much point, being guaranteed a ladder, or if you're a foreigner, Russian citizenship, if you're not going to be alive to enjoy it. And this is the fundamental problem: is that everybody can see that this war is lost. There is no glory in it. You're not going to take part in a glorious victory parade. You're going to take part in a fairly bloody, brutal war where there's a low chance of success. So it's a problem for President Putin, and it's a problem for the Russian people. It's a problem for President Putin because what this shows clearly is that the Russian people don't believe the propaganda, because it's all well and good to hold rallies and opinion polls showing 100% approval. But when people are given a choice, they voted with their feet and they left. It's a problem for the Russian people because not only are they losing a lot of manpower in terms of people being mobilized and people fleeing, this is also clearly costing their economy a lot of money, because the people being mobilized are leaving their jobs, they're not paying taxes, they're not looking after their families. The people fleeing, the same thing. All of this labor is leaving the country. And the final element is that what you see is, again, the core of Russia's population is concentrated in two big areas, St. Petersburg and Moscow. The rest of Russia is quite empty, and a lot of the peripheral places in Russia are populated by ethnic minorities, so Siberians, Chechens, Dagestanis, people who are Muslims, who are Buddhists. You'll see that the mobilization in those areas has been almost 100% of the menfolk, or a high percentage of the menfolk, whilst you see the population of St. Petersburg and Moscow voted with their feet and left. Right. So, as I said, part of the problem for the Russian people is that it now is going to exacerbate ethnic tensions within and community tensions in the country, in that it looks like the white Christian Russians are being left alone, while the Muslim and Buddhist, ethnic minority Russians are being sent to fight for Putin's war.
In almost sense that it's a strategy for President Vladimir Putin. But to the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline, they were attacked earlier this week. You've seen the blame game between the West and Russia. Well, Russia this morning saying that NATO forces were found quite close to the pipelines. And then, Sweden, I think, European intelligence officials say that they also found Russian warships close enough to the Nord Stream pipeline. The U.S. Defense Secretary says we'll probably know in a few days, a bit too early to tell who was responsible. But the Europeans are thinking, this is sabotage on the part of Russia. Now, if it is, what is the gain for Russia here if it did intentionally attack the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipeline supplying gas to the rest of Europe?
It's a very good question, and if we try and look at it conventionally, it doesn't make any sense. But if we look at it through the prism of Russia's actions in the past, and again, I'm not saying Russia did this. It's 50-50 who might have done this. It could be the US or NATO. It could be the Russians. It could be a third party. It could be Poland. It could be Ukraine. It could be Qatar. It could even be Angola. Trying to secure gas supplies to Europe. So I don't know. Nobody really knows who did, and I doubt we'll ever know. But if we're looking at it purely from the Russian point of view, the strategic benefits might seem really limited, but in fact, there are strategic benefits to it. There's several. The first is it signals to Europe that they are definitely not going to be getting any gas from Russia this winter through that means. They're dependent now on a few pipelines going through Ukraine, going through Hungary, and those are all in Russia's gift to shut down. It also frees Russia from having to pay fines if they continue to fail to deliver gas. So they're contractually obliged to deliver gas to Western Europe. They've refused to do so, claiming maintenance issues. That's been disputed because the sanctions don't affect maintenance of the pipe. So if they continue failing to deliver gas, they will be liable for fines in the international arbitration courts. The other element is the strategic element in that by attacking, if the Russians did it, by attacking their own infrastructure, what they're messaging to the West is we have the capability to destroy pipes. We've attacked our own pipe, so you can't retaliate against us for it. But we can also attack every other pipe on the seabed, not just gas pipes. There's internet cables, data cables. There's all manner of stuff on the sea that can be attacked. So you can look at this as a demonstration of capability, as well as a commercial decision. But again, it still doesn't make much strategic sense. But then there's been a lot of things Russia has done in the past few months that don't make strategic sense.
Thank you so much, Chidi, for your thoughts and your analysis on the situation in Ukraine and Russia, of course.
Thank you for having me.
Well, quickly to sports news now. Former world heavyweight champion Nikolai Valuev has revealed he has been summoned to fight for Vladimir Putin's Russian army in Ukraine. Valuev, who was a two-time WBA title holder and is the tallest and heaviest world champion ever, is planning to enlist next week. He fought David Haye in 2009, losing to the Brits by a majority decision. It turned out to be his final fight. He moved into politics to become a member of parliament in Putin's United Russia Party 2 years later. Also, Ukraine's Oleksandr Usyk has hinted he could step into the ring with Anthony Joshua for a third time if he fails to secure a fight with British rival Tyson Fury. Fury has returned to negotiations for the all-British heavyweight superfight with Joshua, but a contract has not been signed. Joshua could have a third crack at Usyk after being outboxed by the Ukrainian in Saudi Arabia and in London. Usyk retained his WBA, IBF, IBO, and WBO heavyweight championships against Joshua over the summer. And Germany, it says it is moving to protect its gas infrastructure in light of incidents that caused the Russian Nord Stream gas pipelines to leak into the sea, which is now urgent. In an interview on that day, Germany unveiled new relief measures worth 200 billion euros to fight soaring gas prices. Klaus Müller urged Germans to cut consumption, which jumped 14% during a cold snap last week. Europe is currently scrambling to investigate suspected sabotage that caused the pipelines carrying Russian gas to leak into the Baltic Sea. It does remain unclear, however, who might be behind any planned attack. Neither pipeline was operating at the time, but Germany had experienced sustained hot weather in the summer, but a cold snap in September means people need to make decisions on how much they want to heat their homes. Mueller says he wants overall consumption to fall by 20%. And finally on the programme, Denmark's Defence Minister Morten Botskjov has visited the crew of the Danish Air Force F-16 jet on Bonum Island. It's been inspecting the gas leaks from the nearby Nord Stream gas pipeline. Botskjov and Environment Minister Lea Wermelin were on the island, Denmark's easternmost point, to talk to those involved in the work to monitor and assess the leaks from Nord Stream pipelines, which have been spewing gas into the Baltic Sea. Armed forces, coast guards, maritime authorities, energy agencies, and police from counties such as Sweden, Germany, and Denmark are all carrying out investigations into what happened. Well, Sweden's Coast Guard discovered a fourth leak on the damaged Nord Stream pipelines earlier this week after ruptures first reported on Monday sent gas leaking into the Baltic Sea. The leak reported on Thursday is the second one found in Swedish waters, while two others were discovered in Danish waters. We have an update at 5. Stay with us. I'm Amarachi.